It is a terrible feeling to know that they actually can keep it together, they're able to keep together, but that they're not willing to do that for you, that they choose not to keep it together for you. Instead, they take their rage out on you. It's very frustrating. It leads a lot of people to blame themselves. So this series is really going to break down the sort of continuum of narcissism and how to manage narcissistic relationships at different levels of severity. It's very, very clear that narcissism is on a continuum, from sort of low-grade, superficial, egocentric, attention-seeking narcissism all the way up to manipulative, exploitative, menacing, coercive, terrifying, malignant narcissism. The diversity of subtypes and severity can sometimes leave people trying to figure out how to cope in their particular situation and feeling as though their story is actually quite different than someone else's who's in a narcissistic relationship. A person who is coping with or who is raised by or working with or whatever in a relationship with a low-grade narcissist. Low-grade narcissists sort of seem like immature baby adults. They're managing something quite different than the terror and fear of someone who is managing a malignant, exploitative, and at times seemingly dangerous narcissistic person. These two sets of people may feel as though they are in entirely different situations and require different tools, and may leave one group wondering, am I actually in a narcissistic relationship? Because their story is real different than mine. Because there's variability, many people aren't even clear if the model of narcissism actually applies to their situation. This is going to be a brief 3-part series that takes the spectrum of narcissism, and I'm going to sort of break it down into low, medium, and high. These 3 classifications result in different experiences for the people in relationships with these folks, different types of coping, and different sets of expectations, and may help you understand, like, oh, I see why my situation's a little bit different. So let's start with the low-grade narcissist. It seems like a nicer place to start. These are folks who you may experience as superficial, attention-seeking, shallow, immature, egocentric, mildly entitled, a bit grandiose, at times kind of needy, and these are folks who never really quite evolve into full-on adulthood. There's a personality style out there that, I don't like the name of it, but it's a thing. It's called histrionic personality. That personality style really takes in a lot of the territory of the lower grade narcissism. These are folks who are emotionally shallow, dramatic, who consider relationships to be closer than they really are, who are very attention-seeking, and who are quite uncomfortable when they are not the center of attention or aren't getting all the adulation and compliments. They tend to use their appearance to draw attention to themselves and may often be quite flirty, handsy, and sort of seductive-y. They tend to live in a low-grade fantasy world all the time. You may see them seeking out sort of their fantasies of fame and fortune and talking about their fantasies a lot. The big house I'm going to have, the hit record, the influencer fame. Who knows? Maybe some of them will make it. But they talk about it so often that it almost becomes their narrative, that they're living in it, but they're not. And then they sometimes get quite frustrated as a result. In a word, low-grade narcissistic people are often experienced as annoying. They aren't scary like the malignant folks or even that good at being manipulative. There is an immature, annoying, and again at times needy quality to them. They sort of run their lives as baby adults. They look like adults, but they maintain rather childlike inspiration, which at some level is fine, but they may try to do this on other people's backs and get resentful when their pursuit of fame or fortune or whatever their next big thing is isn't realized. The low-grade narcissistic folks think famous people or famous adjacent people are so cool without really getting to know them. Hip cred really matters to them. But again, they aren't the mean, gaslighting, manipulative, cut-you-to-your-soul narcissists. This is your 45-year-old friend that still cares deeply about the number of likes they got on their sunset picture, or ask you to retake the picture of them 27 times with them holding up the wine glass, or the person that still talks about how they are just about to make it big, this is the next big thing, wait till I tell you who I just met, or the family member that monopolizes the holiday table conversation and makes everything about them. Again, it's annoying, but it's not cruel. Relationships with these low-grade narcissistic folks can actually sometimes be really fun, especially if they're sort of a fun friend to go out with, or in the early dates of a romantic relationship, when it may be exciting sex, public displays of affection, lots of social media love displays, loud laughter, fun nights out, and feeling as though you are with potentially the most attractive and charismatic person in the place. Over time, as life happens, and it isn't just happy hour or a dinner party or a music festival, and you actually have to do real life stuff like budgets or compromise, these low-grade narcissistic folks will start wearing thin. The conversations are rarely deep, the intimacy can feel quite shallow, and when you have adult needs that may require them to be emotionally regulated or make a sacrifice, or perhaps you need to work or need space to just get a deadline met, they may sulk like a spoiled, petulant child that wants to go to the park instead of you working. You will feel like a parent and be the one who has to ensure that the bills get paid on time and that stuff gets done around the house. And at times you may burn out and having to be in the sort of adulting role in this relationship. In vulnerable narcissism, when it presents at lower levels, it really looks like sullen adolescence, petulant, bratty, why do I have to do this and nobody else does kind of 15-year-old who won't empty the dishwasher kind of stuff. If you are in a relationship with someone like this, you may want them to put their big kid pants on and take some responsibility, help out a little bit, act a little bit more like an adult and less like a sullen teenager. And when you call them out on their patterns, you may get a bit of a sneer and some irritability when they do not get their way. So in the long term, you may wonder, how am I supposed to cope with a low-grade narcissist? If you are in a relationship with a low-grade narcissist, I guess your expectations have to be around a more shallow, superficial, kind of immature relationship, and yes, it will be annoying at times. You're not going to encounter the malevolent, antagonistic, and manipulative abuse that we tend to see in the higher levels of narcissism, but instead, you may feel like you're in a relationship with sort of an overgrown adolescent. They may not step up and adult in ways like putting things away around the house, getting the tax stuff together, that kind of stuff. And you may see some angry tantrums when you do call them out on their immaturity or their pie-in-the-skyness. You may also see some neediness and that they want to spend more time together when you actually may have to do your adult stuff like work. Now, some folks may find a relationship with a low-grade narcissistic person to actually be quite workable. They may find that even though they're in a relationship with this low-grade narcissist, that their own deeper intellectual needs, maybe they're being met at work or in school, that their emotional needs are being met with other friends or family, and recognize that, for example, they may just simply be very physically attracted to their partner who is a low-grade narcissist, or still have lots of fun with them, or have some shared hobbies with them, or may not actually even mind being in a parental role with a partner because it works for them, because they're like, yeah, I just sort of like to be the one who's in charge. Gaslighting and other toxic themes may pop up in a light way from time to time, but like I said, likely in a more adolescent and lighter manner, rather than the more targeted campaign that's designed to dissemble your sanity in the way we might see in a more severe, hardcore narcissistic person. Low-grade narcissists may do immature, sort of shady things, like liking inappropriate pictures on social media or posting inappropriate things to get attention. Again, it's annoying, right? As always with any narcissistic style, this is also not a style that's not likely to change that much. There may be some patchy empathy here and there. Maybe it's just enough to get you by. There is not likely to be much self-reflective capacity or awareness of how their behavior is affecting you. You may pick up the same towel off the ground 365 days a year, and no matter how many times you point it out or you ask, they just don't remember. Not to stick it to you, but because it just doesn't matter to them that your environment is being affected, and they don't care that the towel is on the ground. A person with a low-grade narcissistic style may not take the time to learn about or participate in things that matter to you unless they interest them. Again, only you know if that disinterest actually matters to you enough to bother you. But the bottom line is that this relationship is probably never going to be that deep. Sharing parenting duties with a low-level narcissistic person is a bit of a mixed bag. In some ways, their childishness can make them a fun parent for the kids. However, it would be damn near impossible for them to balance the demands of work and parenting. They may, for example, resent you if you ask them to help with children after a day at work or on the weekend where they'll say, "I've been working all week." When they do step up for the children, they will not be the parent who is good at rules, routines, limits, boundaries, making dentist appointments, filling out school forms, all of that kind of killjoy, keep the trains running on time stuff. But the low-grade narcissistic person might very well throw a hell of a birthday party, or be fun at that birthday party at least, might dress them up like mini-me's. They may be the one who cheers the loudest at the soccer game. And as the children come up into adolescence and adulthood, will want to be a friend more than a parent. The low tolerance for frustration may mean that in lower grade narcissistic people, they may not do well with children who are misbehaving or are difficult to soothe or who are mouthy in adolescence. You have to be the parent times 2 if you have children with someone like this, or with honestly any narcissistic person. This is really sort of your classic prototypically Disneyland parent. Now, here's a question. What if you had a parent like this? What if your own parent, when you were growing up, was a low-grade narcissist? This wasn't always an easy way to grow up, but it wasn't impossible. And it may not have been the wasteland of invalidation and rage that those with narcissistic parents further up the severity spectrum had to endure. It may even have been fun at times. But there's also an anxiety to having a low-grade narcissistic parent. Children need routine, structure, rules, expectations, and someone who is compassionately keeping the trains running on time. These are the parents who may not stay on top of things, or who may just minimize things and leave the child feeling that they have to be on top of everything, which can really be anxiety-inducing for a child. The low-grade narcissistic parent may be superficial in a manner that leaves the child feeling as though things are slipping through the cracks. And the parent's egocentricity and sort of selfishness can mean that as long as the child's needs or interests are aligned with the parent's needs or wants, at those times the kid will get lots of attention. And so if you have a low-grade narcissistic parent, you might sort of try to excel at the sport that the parent likes, or join the pageants that the parent wants the child to join, or pursue some attention-seeking activity and really try hard at it, I don't know, like performing of some kind, so the parent will be interested in them. If you have only one low-grade narcissistic parent, you may remember your other parent running in circles to get everything done, since your narcissistic parent didn't really do much of the heavy lifting. But your other parent may have also made excuses for your low-grade narcissistic parent, which could add to your confusion. Now, having a parent like this means that you kind of grow out of them pretty fast. It's sort of a frustrating, not very caregiving parent. You may feel a bit lost since your parent isn't helping you navigate things, or you get really good at navigating them yourself. You may become a bit what we call parentified. You actually start taking more of a parental role, having to step in to make sure younger siblings' needs are met, or that they don't have the same struggles that you did. You may find yourself in the role of having to reassure your narcissistic parent, or even having to be the cheerleader for your low-grade narcissistic parent, or be there for your parent in the way that they should have actually been there for you. In essence, you spend a childhood, and perhaps even a lifetime, basically managing a relatively selfish parent. Because social media is new, this may not have been part of your childhood, because most of you are adults. But nowadays, a parent, a low-grade narcissistic parent, will often use their child as a social media pawn and accessory, and put their children in all kinds of pictures and position themselves as the world's most fun and attractive, hot and loving parent. Now, we're about to find out in the next 10 to 20 years what happens to a generation of children who were basically supply-seeking tools for their narcissistic parents, who plastered them all over social media for validation. As you go into adulthood, this parent, you might find, may want to be your best friend, over-involved in your life. You may find yourself at times having to babysit the parent. They may want to spend time with your friends and sort of be one of your gang, which can sort of feel boundary uncomfortable. And again, I keep coming back to this, the toxicity of this style isn't on par with more severe forms of narcissism, but rather it can feel like them having overly permeable boundaries and you experiencing a sort of low-grade exhaustion around their immaturity. Coping with a parent who has this low-grade narcissism like this can mean needing to have realistic expectations and recognizing that they will still sometimes hurt your feelings when you tell them that, or actually you will have hurt their feelings when you tell them that you and your friends or your own family may be doing your own thing. These low-grade narcissistic folks are very needy and they always want to be along for the ride. In the workplace, this style may not feel toxic, just sort of ridiculous and attention-seeking. But it may seem that people who are at this lower range of narcissism are better at the grandiose grandstanding, they're more political at work, and they may expect other people to do the work and are happy to take the credit. They may also behave inappropriately in the workplace, which can include things like being sort of overly familiar with people, overly flirtatious, overly loud, overly boisterous. Bosses like this may be more concerned with how the brochure looks, even while the performance results are lackluster, and maintain a sort of college-age environment in the workplace, which can diminish sort of the seriousness that the job may require and also mean that stuff isn't getting done. This can mean that the more serious people in the workplace, once again, have to step up, be the grown-ups, and take up the slack so that the low-grade narcissistic baby people can be childish. Ultimately, the low-grade narcissistic folks can be managed via realistic expectations, patience, a willingness, not always a willingness, to take up the slack, and giving up in this relationship on any kind of substantial depth, empathy, or intimacy. The question for you is whether that superficial level of engagement is sustainable. And I think everyone has a different feeling about that, which is fine. For many people, it depends. A friendship, a collegial relationship at work or in school, even a family relationship of some kind, these are potentially sustainable with the low-grade narcissist. They just may be a little bit annoying. A long-term intimate partnership is going to be a little bit more difficult, but it's definitely not going to be as impossible when we compare it to people with the higher levels of narcissism. So those of you who are with these folks who are sort of superficial, needy, attention-seeking, kind of feel like they're on an eternal sort of 16-year-old life or sometimes 10-year-old life, that's what this feels like. Definitely not as manipulative, definitely not as difficult. Yes, it still qualifies under that sort of narcissism piece. But yeah, I hear you, because I know some of you feel like, my experience isn't as bad as some of the stuff you talk about on this channel. But it still can leave you wondering, like, am I being mean by thinking this person's so annoying? Nah, they probably are. And only you know whether you're going to be able to engage in the kind of acceptance and expectations that allow a relationship like this to sustain. So, you're being manipulated, and you're being gaslighted, and you have a partner who can dish it out, but they sure as heck can't take feedback. Their empathy may be spotty, And they can be a bit of an ass in terms of how they treat other people or talk about other people. But in this relationship you have with this person, there are actually some good days. This person does the right thing sometimes. They might even sometimes even help out people that both of you know. Sometimes if you're co-parenting with this person, they're actually an involved and somewhat attentive parent. Certainly not a perfect parent, but they sometimes get it right. Behind closed doors, this person may be cruel, but other people, when they're in public, think they're a great person, especially if they only see this person in short doses. There are enough good days to confuse you and enough bad days to break your heart. Any of you resonate with this situation? Because if so, you may be dealing with the mid-range narcissist. Now, this sort of middle-range narcissism is the form of narcissism that most of us are dealing with in our lives. It's not the annoying, at times needy, immature, but sort of general kind of cotton candy froth of the low-grade narcissist. It's also not the coercive terror of the malignant narcissist. It's this idea of enough good days to keep you in, but enough bad days to harm your mental health and leave you feeling really confused. Now, depending on how the people around you have to interact with the mid-range narcissists that happen to be in your life, you may also have the added issue that some people may see what it is you're up against, while other people around you don't. So this series takes on the continuum of narcissism: low, mid, and high-range narcissism. Lots of times people will say, really, if that's what a narcissist is, that's not what I'm going through, especially if you're sort of comparing a low range to a high range, or even a mid-range to a high-range narcissist. So I hope that this series gives you some clarity. And if you do end up finding this video helpful, please feel free to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. You know what? I do need the validation too, just a little bit. It really helps this channel reach other people who might not know about it. And we know that the best way to stop enabling is to get as many people to know about narcissism. And also, please don't forget to click that bell to be notified, because I upload new content daily. Just sort of a reminder to make sure that you're always informed about narcissism so it doesn't sneak up on you. So, in this idea of the mid-range narcissist, let's break this down, okay? Because this is the middle, but this is what most of us struggle with. This is the narcissistic person who more often than not may come just under the threshold of what people in the mental health field would consider narcissistic personality disorder. Now, I think I've made it pretty clear on this channel. You know my feelings on this diagnosis. I am not a fan. I don't even think narcissistic personality disorder should be a thing. I'll talk about that in a future video. But frankly, this mid-range narcissist, if they sat in a therapist's office, it's almost a coin flip on whether they would be called out as having that particular personality disorder. The mid-range narcissist has all the stuff of narcissism, but it can be a bit of a mixed bag. They will have variable to low empathy. More often than not, they will not have empathy. And so in this kind of a relationship, you will regularly feel hurt or unseen or unheard. But every so often, you will have the sort of happy empathy coincidence. It's often observed in narcissistic relationships. And what I mean by that is their good day, just by luck, just by coincidence, happens to align with your good day, and then you feel seen and heard. But it's not because they're being empathic, it's because it was kind of just a coincidence, an alignment. Or they will deploy their empathy in a transactional way to get something that they need from you or someone else. So I don't know if that's empathy, that seems more like manipulation. But people get confused by the mid-range narcissists because they will also sometimes cry at the movies or at bad news. So it feels like there's empathy, at least they're empathic with the characters in the movie, right? So please, I would love for you to drop a comment if happy empathy coincidences and sort of the manipulative faux empathy ever confused things for you in your narcissistic relationship. Now, the entitlement in narcissism mid-range will be consistent, but they may have just enough insight to know when they are being a jerk, and then they still do it. The validation and the admiration seeking in the mid-range narcissist will also be pretty consistent, either in how they talk about themselves, like, I'm a really great guy, aren't I? They really do say that out loud. I swear to you, they do. Or in getting frustrated when they don't feel like they are getting enough admiration, and frequently doing anything they can to get as much admiration as possible. Now, in the mid-range narcissistic person, there will definitely be arrogance. It may not be that sort of scary, menacing arrogance, like, nobody ever gets anything by me, you just better watch out. But it's more jerky, kind of cocky arrogance. There may be a rather controlling style, but it's not scary, stalker controlling. But it may be that they're controlling about any number of things like finances, children's schedules, workplace schedules, how the holidays have to be, whatever the vacations have to be. Like, they're very controlling about that. They will be incredibly sensitive to any kind of criticism. They'll be they tend to blame other people when they themselves do something wrong. They shift the blame. There's a fair amount of self-victimization, this idea that people just have it in for me, don't they? Or why can't I ever get a break? How come things always work out for everyone else? You'll definitely see that in their mid-range narcissist. They will also have all of the usual patterns that we observe in narcissism. Manipulation, so they're good at leaving you feeling guilty, they're good at buttering you up to get what they need from you, or making you feel as though something is your idea and then blaming you for it if it doesn't go right. They may use tears and crying to get their way. They may use the possibility of their anger to get their way, use storming off to get their way, use silence to get their way. They just kind of want to get their way. You see gaslighting, you'll see invalidation. Rage can definitely be an issue at times in the mid-range narcissist, especially if their shame gets activated, and their shame will get activated. But it may not always be the full-on, constantly walking on eggshells rage. But there is a sense that if this kind of narcissistic person gets set off, then it ain't going to be pretty. But here is where the mid-range narcissistic person or mid-range narcissism gets tricky. They have just enough insight to know that their behavior isn't okay, but they don't have enough regulation, mindfulness, or empathy to stop themselves. As a result, this results in a really interesting kind of dichotomy. They are a devil at home and an angel in the street. They will put on the best face at the dinner party or the family reunion or some other social get-together. And then as soon as you get in the car, they will go off on you. They can compliment you in the work meeting or praise the team for what a great job that they're doing or you're doing. And then once the client is gone or whoever's visiting the meeting is gone and you're in a closed-door meeting, they will verbally eviscerate you. Obviously, the mid-range narcissist has some insight because they know it isn't okay to scream and yell and insult you and be mean to you in front of other people. So they learn to do it out of sight of other people, which can mean that when you are in a relationship with a mid-range narcissistic person, you may often find yourself not having a lot of support. People may see a relatively composed person in public or at an event, and that will be a disconnect from what you're experiencing at home or in private. And because the mid-range narcissistic person desperately cares about how other people view them, They know exactly when when they have to put the mask on and when they can take it off. An interesting analogy, right? It is a terrible feeling to know that they actually can keep it together, they're able to keep together, but that they're not willing to do that for you, that they choose not to keep it together for you. Instead, they take their rage out on you. It's very frustrating. It leads a lot of people to blame themselves. This two-faced mask on, mask off is very much a trademark of the mid-range narcissist. Some of this relates to something that I sort of view through a model of tension reduction. That angry rage that rises up in a narcissistic person because they feel slighted, or they feel shamed, or they feel inadequate, or they feel insecure, that does not feel good to them. So when they can let it out and they take it out on someone where they can get away with it, a family member, a partner, a child, somebody who's beneath them, subordinate to them at work, that allows them to release the tension, get it all out in private, but then still look good to other people. Because of this, getting help from other people when you are in a relationship with a mid-range narcissist is really difficult. Lots of people see the good version of them, and you may struggle with not wanting to blow that image of the mid-range narcissist in case you stay in the relationship, or more likely, you doubt yourself. You may think that, maybe I'm just making too big a deal of things. Maybe I'm the one who's overreacting. Maybe this is just how relationships are. Once again, that never-ending cycle of self-blame that characterizes people who are stuck in narcissistic relationships. Now, when you're dealing with a mid-range narcissistic relationship, the decision to stay or go is not an easy one. And as I've said, there are enough good days to confuse you. And the impact of the mid-range narcissist on children, on other family members, or on your career, as well as the question of whether the devil you know is better than the devil you don't, it can make these relationships very challenging, and it can make it very challenging to make any decisions about these relationships. Do I stay? Do I not? Is it so bad I need to leave? Do I really want to go into the great unknown? All of that. Now, if you stay, be prepared for the roller coaster. The constant manipulation, gaslighting, invalidation, rage, and the spotty empathy. All of that will be a part of the picture forever. And realistic expectations and radical acceptance will be necessary to move through the days if you decide to stay in a relationship like this. You may need to learn to do things like choose your battles, cultivate friendships and other supports to get those human empathy needs met, and work within the limitations of this mid-range narcissistic relationship to maintain what you may consider to be sort of the workable parts of this relationship or these relationships, as well as to avoid the disruptions to your life that may be too overwhelming. For example, a divorce, quitting a job, sharing custody of kids, or cutting out from a family system. Now, there's some pitfalls to avoid when it comes to mid-range narcissism. Don't try to school or teach other people in your life about the mid-range narcissistic person in your life. Either they get it or they don't. And you teaching them ain't going to happen. Drop it in the comments right now. Have any of you ever tried to teach or school somebody about narcissism? Say, look, my partner's narcissistic or my boss, and have it backfire on you, that somebody shames you for it. Be curious to hear what you have to say. Alternatively, what was it like to discover that someone in your circle was also able to see narcissistic people for what they are? That's actually a real blessing. Find support in the people who do get it. And absolutely, if you can, consider therapy with a therapist who gets it. Don't engage. Don't wait for change. Don't defend. Don't explain. None of that is going to work either with the mid-range narcissist or the people who enable them. You can ride the waves on the good days. Try not to personalize the bad days. And above all else, please stop blaming yourself. What I'm talking about, this mid-range narcissism, situation. This is the ride that most people who are in a relationship with a narcissist are in. The mid-range ones. This is not the stuff of dangerous relationship horror stories, nor is it just the vapid, low-grade selfie narcissist. Nah, instead, it's just bad enough to confuse and enrage you, but just good enough to leave you questioning yourself. All right, everybody, so here's a question for you. Where's the line between a narcissist and a psychopath? Because there is a point where narcissism kind of starts bleeding. It's kind of a bad metaphor, but bleeding into psychopathy. It's that tiny gap right after malignant narcissism. However, narcissism and psychopathy are distinct entities. The psychopaths aren't so plagued by insecurity and anxiety. They do really well under stress. They're very cool operators, and they're smart as hell. Most importantly, they lack remorse. And these top notes distinguish the psychopaths from their very close cousins, the malignant narcissists. I have worked with clients who were managing severe, high-end, as we call them, narcissists, and it took us a minute to figure out if what they were managing was straight-up psychopathy or what I term the neurotic psychopath, which is, in essence, the malignant narcissist. This video is part of a series on the continuum of narcissism, the low end of narcissism, sort of the mid-range of narcissism, and here we are at the high end, or the more frightening, scary, severe end of narcissism on a continuum. And as always, please consider giving this video a like, a thumbs up if you find it helpful, and please subscribe and turn on those notifications so you don't miss any of the videos that come out every day. So let's talk about the high end, the sort of more severe end of the narcissistic continuum. The experience of people who are in relationships with the more severe narcissistic folks is, very simply put, much more frightening, much more destabilizing, much more psychologically harmful and traumatic than the experiences people have with narcissists who are sort of further down this continuum, people who are more mid-range and low-range narcissists. By and large, at this high, more severe end, this is where we find the really severe, grandiose narcissists and the malignant narcissists. In the high-end, severe narcissistic folks, we have all the usual stuff, the lack of empathy, but it's like really cold lack of empathy. Like they literally do not care in any way and will face down any emotion or vulnerability from you. And instead, if you were showing vulnerability to them, will regard people with icy contempt. Their entitlement can be dangerous, and they may harm people who they feel get in their way. Their grandiosity often extends to their hyped up sense of how much they can get away with. Their validation seeking comes more from from fear. They feel validated when they know people may be afraid of them, when the narcissistic person knows they have the power to make or break someone, and that people envy them. They are very controlling, and you may see this in a sort of obsessive precision and how they maintain their surroundings, how they live, how they expect things to be. It can be very scary to work for someone like this, and they are very controlling in their relationships as well, and can be prone to basically stalker-like possessiveness, often tracking their partners via devices tracking devices on their cars or on their phones or even in the house. These are folks that are deeply competitive, and winning and vindictiveness, even more than winning, are governing principles for them. So it's all the stuff we talk about narcissism, but it's more severe and worse. It's much more frightening. Now, if any of you had an experience with a high-end, severe narcissistic person, please share your story in the comments and maybe even some of the patterns you experienced, because I think that when you recognize you're not alone with this, it helps. But also in this mix, when we're talking about the high-end narcissism, is more paranoia, sadism, And people like this are very exploitative and they take advantage of people. The sort of classical throwing people under the bus, and in high-end narcissism, then they drive the bus over the people that they just threw under it. The paranoia is manifested as really truly believing people are out to get them. And they create complex theories at an almost delusional level of how people are trying to take advantage of them or harm them professionally or personally. They will have no problem maligning people publicly, slandering them, or harming their reputations if they feel wronged by them. More severe and more malignant narcissism is also characterized by a more callous style. While they may be able to turn on the charm or even the charisma for a minute, at least initially, or I guess in small doses, over time, their coldness is their prevailing style. Manipulation characterizes everything these higher end narcissistic people do. By and large, every person in their orbit is judged on how useful they are and whether they satisfy a need for them. Typically, those needs would be power or profit or pleasure or validation or all of the above. And they will dismiss or discard anyone who doesn't fit those roles, but they will use them until they don't need them anymore. These severe narcissists will never take responsibility and are masterful at blame shifting. Often, one of the only things that stops a person with this kind of personality is finally getting arrested, being found guilty, and doing time. And even then, until the bitter end, they will blame other people for their downfall. And sadly, if you're dealing with a more wealthy narcissist, because of their power and privilege, those folks can often get away with it for a really, really long time. The rage in more severe, high-end narcissistic folks is terrifying. In the higher, again, more severe ends of this narcissism continuum is where we'll see all kinds of different forms of violence. Physical violence, sexual violence, psychological violence, verbal violence. Everything sets them off. Frustration, disappointment, narcissistic injuries, someone else winning, a sense that someone's looking at them the wrong way, or that they or their family just aren't being treated the way they believe they're entitled to, and they will lash out. The closer they are to being psychopathic, then they are more calculating in how they express that rage. People who are more calculating may be savvy enough to not do it in a way that will get them arrested, or they will do it in private so they don't look bad to other people. But they will express that rage in a terrifying way, and anyone in a relationship with a more severe narcissistic person will characterize the relationship as terrifying. Basically living in an unpredictable hell of not knowing what will set this scary person off, not knowing when the rage will escalate to something more, whether the violence will culminate in death, whether the verbal violence will become physical, and that menace or suggestion of escalation is something the more severe narcissistic people will capitalize on, since everyone is so scared of them. And the fear everyone has of them means that they can control them more. This can happen in a family with a severe, high-end narcissistic parent, in an intimate relationship with a very severe narcissistic partner, in a workplace with a tyrannical boss. Everyone falls into line and is broken by the terror and the fear of the narcissistic abuse. The pattern of coercive control, which I have talked about in the past, is also something we see with more severe malignant narcissism. Remember that coercive control is a form of psychological abuse in which a person is slowly psychologically dismantled. Their identity and their autonomy are taken. The fear of abuse is always present, and the person is isolated from any form of help. It is characterized by chronic criticism, monitoring of the abused partner, like basically monitoring a person's phone, monitoring their social media, using cameras in the house, putting spyware on devices, putting tracking devices in cars and in bags, or limiting a person's freedom, encouraging the person to leave paid employment so they can even be more trapped, or taking away their mode of transportation, financially controlling them, demanding that a partner or person dress a certain way, setting the times when a person can go to sleep or wake up, fighting with them in the middle of the night so as to disrupt their sleep, telling them what to eat, how much to eat, and constantly accusing someone of cheating or flirting. You may also see sexual coercion, demanding sex, requiring sex, or obsessive jealousy, and making constant accusations of infidelity, and perhaps even going so far as requiring the partner who's controlled in this coercive dynamic to always look down or close their eyes when other people walk by. We also see patterns like threatening to abuse children or pets or other dependents in the home, reaching out to people that the abused partner knows and harassing them as well, or telling the abused partner bad things about the people in their life. There are actually laws against coercive control in the United Kingdom and in California, but these can be tough cases to make in court, and the judicial systems do not always seem to have caught up with the legislation. And the way that the severe narcissists, high-end narcissists work, the cold, calculated taking apart of a life, of another human being, this is what the severe narcissistic person does best. Actually, it's also what we observe in cult settings. And honestly, all cult leaders are either severe malignant narcissists or straight-up psychopaths. For people in more severe narcissistic relationships, they may feel as though their experience is something far worse and different than that we observed in sort of the more mid-range and low-range narcissistic relationships. And they're right. The psychological harm that comes to people in these more severe narcissistic relationships, or with narcissistic people at the highest range, it presents like trauma because it is. And it can be dangerous, resulting in death or injury in some cases, as well as significant psychological harm. At the highest end, and we will have these resources posted, just click the link in the top right corner of this video. With the most severe cases of narcissistic abuse, working with law enforcement, domestic violence agencies, or getting legal guidance may be essential given that the dangers are far higher. But frighteningly, many of these sort of higher end, more severe narcissistic people are actually in charge of stuff like countries, companies, universities, hospitals, nonprofits, their own businesses, or they just have lots of money and power. So while it's easy to see these folks as identifiable villains, don't be so sure that everyone else is going to be willing to identify them. In fact, their ability to take their masks on and off, to be cruel in private, and then put on a great and charismatic public face is much smoother than you can imagine unless you've been through it. And it can leave those being abused by them even more isolated and in harm's way. So I hope this series was informative. I know it's very important to recognize that narcissism is on this continuum, and may be why people wonder if this term narcissism really applies to their situation. It's a big word that requires qualifiers, like the different types: grandiose, malignant, vulnerable, communal, and so on. Different severity: low, mid-range, and high. But ultimately, in all cases, people in these relationships feel harmed. They are harmed by the manipulation, the confusion, the fear, the gaslighting, and the sense that they have lost themselves. We are in this together, everyone who's trying to push back on narcissistic abuse. But the continuum does teach us why all of these stories are so different. So I do hope that everyone in this community can band together because we're all going through these difficult situations, but to also understand why sometimes your story may not sound or look like someone else's. It's taken a toll on us, but I have to say, with these folks who are more severely narcissistic and on the higher end of the continuum, the harm that can be done is actually quite tremendous. Thank you again.